The Buffalo Bills go a little old school wrestling with a complete demolition of the Dallas Cowboys. Welcome to the Buffalo End Zone podcast. I am Andy Young.
And I'm Jon Scott, and how the tables have turned, Andy. I think a matter of weeks ago, the conversation was much more bleak, very different from what we're probably going to have here on this episode, because the Bills are starting to play like the team we expected them to be from the jump.
Yeah, and it was a game where they did things a little differently than maybe you would have expected against the Dallas Cowboys. You thought maybe this game was going to have to be a shootout. Josh Allen, Superman action against Dak Prescott and the highest scoring team in the NFL. It was all about James Cook and the running game. Holy cow. Talk about let James Cook, a coming out party for the Bills' second-year running back. My, was he impressive. Well over 200 total yards of offense, nearly 200 yards just on the ground, had a couple of touchdowns. This is the kind of game that the Bills needed to see, because that takes some of the pressure off Josh Allen to be that hero week in and week out. And yeah, he can put a team on his back, but sometimes it results in disastrous things happening on the other side too. So this was really an incredible performance by the Bills' offensive line, and especially by James Cook.
One of the big issues that I had coming out of the Kansas City win a week ago was how James Cook was really the driving force of the Bills' offense when they jumped out 14-0 against the Chiefs. And then he, for whatever reason, seemed to disappear. And it wasn't because he had one of these mistakes, fumbles, drop passes that we've seen as reasons at other points in the season that he's taken a seat. They just got away from him, and it was inexcusable to me, and to no coincidence, in my opinion, the Bills' offense, when they were not utilizing James Cook and he really wasn't in the game last week, they started to get into a lull. They sputtered. And so coming out of that, it was one of these things with Joe Brady. Okay, there's really two focal points that I think were important coming into this one that I wanted the Bills to establish against the Cowboys. Get James Cook on the field and get him the ball in some capacity, whether that be running the football or catching the football. And the other was getting Stephon Diggs involved. We'll get to that a little bit later. With Cook, a career-high 25 rushing attempts, a career-high 179 rushing yards. He got a touchdown. Also early, 2 catches, 42 yards, and a touchdown on a beautiful play design and throw by Josh Allen. To your point, that's well over 220 yards of total offense on 27 touches. And when I look at James Cook's numbers from this year, touches, 16, 21, 17, 13, 8, 14. I mean, it was right in that teen range. But the last month or so, since Joe Brady became the offensive coordinator, 20 touches for James Cook against the Jets, 22 against Philadelphia, only 15 against Kansas City, which was my issue. And now you get here and he gets 27. He's making the most of his opportunities. And clearly, he is, as I call him, a plus matchup and someone that the Bills should go through as someone that could be the catalyst for this offense and make defenses really find themselves in a bind in different ways.
And it's incredible to think back to the beginning of the season. People, they kind of like James Cook, but it was like, whatever. The Bills are a passing team. It's going to go through Allen. It's going to go through Diggs, Gabe Davis. Would he have a breakout year? Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox. And then to find out towards the end of the season, James Cook is really their most reliable offensive weapon at this point, even surpassing Stephon Diggs, who's just been off for the last 6-8 weeks for some reason or other, whether that's teams taking him out of the play or he's got something else going on, a couple of drops here or there. He has just not had those big Stephon Diggs types of games that we're normally used to seeing. So to have James Cook and that consistency, and for them to have the trust in him, I think it takes time, whether that's right or wrong, that the coaching staff learned that, hey, this guy is really an incredible playmaker. He's had a couple of fumbles, and he was in the doghouse a couple of different times over the past couple of seasons, but he hasn't made a whole lot of mistakes. He's had a couple of drops, but man, when he is in the game, and especially compared to when Latavius Murray is in the game, it is night and day. The guy is just explosive. He's patient. He has vision. And when he finds the seam, he makes guys miss and makes them pay with his athleticism. Runs great routes in the passing game. I mean, look at that corner post route he had to score a touchdown. That looked like a wide receiver out there. So he is really impressive, really coming on. And the Bills, like you said, need to lean into that down the stretch.
5 straight games now with 100 yards of total offense. That's impressive. I mean, he does it running the football. He does it catching the football. That was obviously what he was really built for. Brandon Beane, the night they drafted him in the second round a few years ago, Beane really hammering home how he's like a wide receiver who's a running back. And that's, I think, how often we've looked at him. He's small of stature. He has always been in a platoon running back by committee, even at Georgia. And it always seemed like, all right, he could be the number one, but maybe he's not the guy that you could just hand it off to 20, 25 times a game and he can be effective. Well, I guess he answered that against a very, very good Dallas defense that came into this one ranked 13th in the league in allowing that. But I think part of that is because teams probably also get away from it because the Cowboys have such a prolific offense. James Cook moving forward is going to be interesting. Not only how the Bills use him, but how defenses account for him. Because while he's on a hot streak and the offensive line is continuing to show that the continuity and the pieces and maybe reaping the rewards of, knock on wood, Andy, everyone has been healthy and they've played together for 14 games now. How our offense or defense is going to counter this? Are they going to have to really put more eggs in the basket to try to stack up the box a little bit to make it so James Cook can't run loose like this and get in space? And how will that then change things for this Bills passing attack? It'll be an interesting dynamic here, and this is why you often hear complimentary football, and I'll be one of those guys to admit, kind of roll my eyes at it. I just always say, hey, they need to run it more effectively when they do. But I'll give Joe Brady the utmost applause because we've seen him in the Kansas City game, and obviously this is something I think Dorsey it was one of his bad habits, was when something's cooking, no pun intended, just keep doing it. Keep doing it, and sometimes the Bills' offense seems to have found something effective early, and then for whatever reason gets away from it. I really applaud Joe Brady from saying, hey, on one drive, I think they ran it 13 out of 14 plays. We're going to keep handing it off. We're going to keep running it down your throat until you, the Dallas defense, can stop it, which they couldn't, so the Bills just kept doing it.
As a former substandard high school football offensive lineman, I am really glad that you brought up the big guys up front. And the fact that Deion Dawkins, Connor McGovern, Mitch Morse, Osiris Torrance, Spencer Brown, knock on wood, as you said, have been together all season long. And flowers to Brandon Beane for bringing in McGovern. He solidified that left guard spot that has been troublesome at times throughout the years. And then drafting Torrance. And then saying, you know what, we're going to let the rookie start over incumbent starter Ryan Bates because he's just the better guy. And that has proven to be fruitful for the Bills this season. You look at what they're able to do. Communication, and people don't realize this, but communication is a big deal on the offensive line, especially when teams like Dallas are running twists and stunts and all those sorts of things. You got to know what the other guy's thinking and what he's going to do during certain protections. And the fact that they've been able to hold up so well throughout the year and for the most part have kept Josh Allen clean has been great. But Allen said it today after the game. They really want to run the ball. Yeah, they like to keep Josh clean. Those guys want to get out there and pound the other team. And they just absolutely asserted their will over the Dallas Cowboys. Now, Dallas is not a great run defense, as you mentioned, but they're not awful either. They just destroyed them. They took their heart away almost from the start of the game. And it was really, really impressive to see. And just shout out to those guys who've done a fantastic job throughout this season. And I think Coach McDermott also gave some props to Coach Cromer for what he did in developing the running game and kind of coordinating that part of the offense.
I also want to dive into the distribution of snaps and carries amongst the running backs. Cook, 25 attempts,
Mm-hmm.
But then Ty Johnson was next in line. Obviously, Latavius Murray ends up with 5 for 11, but for the most part, he was stuck at 2 for 2, just used in short yardage. To me, that's the way, Andy, the distribution should go moving forward. I don't need to see Latavius Murray. Honestly, even in short yardage situations, it's not like he's the best at those either, even though he's big. To me, James Cook needs to be the definitive one. And I think the good guy to come in and relieve him is Ty Johnson, who seemingly has come out of nowhere off the practice squad because of the Damian Harris injury and has provided a pop every single time he seems to get the ball. 9 for 54 for Ty Johnson. I've loved what I've seen from him since he's gotten the call up and signed to the active roster. And I like that in a game where the running game was humming, the distribution was predominantly Cook. Next in line is Ty Johnson. And then almost like, okay, here and there, we'll go to Latavius Murray. I think Murray has shown some really good moments and been better than I honestly anticipated he would be. But I don't think that means that he should still, just because, be in the mix. To me, moving forward, because I don't think Damian Harris is coming back this season. To me, I want to see a heavy dose of James Cook. Keep him on the field as much as you can. And then when he needs a blow, Ty Johnson. And then if you got to, Latavius Murray, if you feel more comfortable on like 4th and 1, 3rd and 1, goal to go situations, fine. But I don't need to see much of Latavius Murray, if anything at all.
You know, and it's interesting, too, and we talked about this when they brought Murray in, and we talked about it, too, with Leonard Fournette. Those guys are bigger guys, but over the last few years have not excelled in short yardage situations. So then what exactly is the use, right? If they're not good in those situations or they're just adequate. Now we saw Latavius Murray get a touchdown, but had a lot of help from his friends on the offensive line for that one. You know, he's a leader. Obviously, we know that in his short time here. I think they rely on him more in pass protection than maybe they like to with Cook or Ty Johnson. But I think, yeah, you're exactly right. That needs to be the hierarchy. And I think even Cook or Johnson could get some looks in short yardage. I mean, Johnson looks powerful enough, and he's got some burst. And as shifty as James Cook is, you know, maybe he doesn't plow through a guy, but maybe he makes a guy miss and gets the first down. So I think you're right in that aspect.
Yeah, the pass protection obviously was not really a factor in this one. Josh Allen threw the ball 15 times, and so they weren't dropping back because, like I said, they recognized the offensive line. Those boys up front were really just getting push after push after push, and there was no need to go into the passing attack, which is an interesting and frankly amazing conversation to have, Andy, that the Bills beat the Dallas Cowboys 31-10. And Josh Allen was 7 for 15 for 94 yards and a touchdown. To think that Allen could put up such pedestrian numbers, and it's not because he was bad, it's because they didn't need him, and the Bills offense could perform the way they did, and they beat a very good football team the way they did. That has to be, I don't know, is that more encouraging, Andy, than the sight of anything else that you saw in this football game?
Yeah, and I think so. And who would have thought it would have been a game like this to stop the Josh Allen interception streak, right? What was that, 9 coming in? 8 coming in? Nine, right.
Yep.
That he had thrown an interception. Well, when you don't even have to throw the ball very minimally, you're not going to get picked off, right? So that's one way to keep Josh Allen clean and avoiding those turnovers. But, yeah, you know what? And Sean McDermott brought this up after the game. This is important. The emergence of James Cook gives them another option for when their fastball isn't humming. We know that Josh Allen in the passing game is what has driven this team for really 4 or 5 years now, going back to really 2020. But to have this other option, to say in bad weather, to say against a porous run defense, to say against a team that really likes to get after the passer, okay, cool. We're going to run the ball instead, and we're going to keep doing it until you stop us. And if you can't stop us, we're going to still keep doing it and smash the ball down your throat. It's really encouraging. Now this opens up other things maybe in the passing game that haven't been there quite as much, because teams are going to have to say, holy cow, if they're this juggernaut of a running team, We got to put 8 in the box. All right. Does that free up Diggs, who's been struggling? And I know you want to bring that up too. What do you think is the deal with Diggs over the last 2 months?
I think this game is one where a little bit, because he had a drop, the only possession really that the first team offense didn't score points. It was good coverage by Stephon Gilmore, and maybe the broadcast, which you had a better vantage point of, showed it differently. But from what I saw in a replay, it looked like Diggs dropped a 3rd and 2 pass that was right in his stomach.
Yep.
And that's been an issue. And I know we spoke about it this week. You did a story on it heading into the game about where Diggs is at with some of the team, whether that's Joe Brady, Josh Allen, Sean McDermott, and the likes of those guys, about where Diggs is at. I mean, for 15 pass attempts for Josh Allen, 5 of them went to Diggs. and the target share has not been the issue for Diggs. It's the catch percentage and the impact he's been making. 4 for 48 on 5 targets in a game where Allen's 7 for 15 for 94. I think if you're just going to kind of look at it in the small window, that's better, right? That's better that half of the passing yards that Allen and half of the completions and half of a third of the targets are going Diggs' way. Those are the numbers. If you extrapolate them to the normal magnitude that we see from the passing game, you're probably getting Diggs back to where he needs to go. On top of the fact, Stephon Gilmore is a good cornerback, and Bland is a good cornerback too on the opposite side. So it was always going to be tougher sledding, even though Diggs is a guy that can always beat him. I think to your point with Cook, and I said it earlier, what are defenses going to do now? How are they going to account for what James Cook is turning into? And he's going to be probably a top 5 in the NFL, if not higher, in rushing yards after this performance.
And scrimmage yards.
You know what he could do in the passing game. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me or be a problem if next game he's like 10 for 45, but then maybe he has 5-6 targets. And that can be the way that he's a difference maker as well. That's what makes him such a great piece and weapon for this Bills offense. And you're right. Now, if you have to account by bringing another guy for Cook, whether that be passing or whatever, what does that do for Diggs? I honestly think, what more so does it do for a guy like Dalton Kincaid? It opens things up in the middle. Does it take a backer away? Does it take a safety, which then open things up off the top? I mean, it forces defenses to play maybe in different personnel packages than they're comfortable with on not obvious passing situations. So this is where the evolution of Cook can really make things so much more dynamic for everyone else. And I think that could include Stephon Diggs. I will just say this. I don't think he's discontent. Any idea or feelings, I know maybe residual from the offseason and how all that unplayed. There may be concern that, Diggs' numbers aren't where they are, this and that. I don't feel that way. You obviously were there this week. I would assume your feelings would be the same for people that might be concerned.
Yeah, like you said, Stephon Diggs spoke to the media on Thursday leading into the Dallas game, and he was asked point blank, what is behind your struggles to consistently have the big games that we saw from him in the beginning of the season, where I think he had 5 100-yard games and he had 8 touchdowns and he was really rolling, and what we expect from Stephon Diggs. And he said, yeah, you know what? It's frustrating. I want to go out there and I want to be at the top level and I want to be the best receiver in the game, in essence, is what he was saying. But also at the same time that, teams are doing a good job of double teaming him. He didn't really address himself having drops or those sorts of things or what he could do differently. But he said it's not for a lack of trying. It's not for him dogging it. But he's happy that at the same time, other guys are getting involved. You'd like to see Gabe Davis be more consistent. You'd like to see other guys in the passing game be more consistent. I think you saw Kincaid today had a couple of drops, and on the broadcast, I don't know if you saw it, John, he had rain gloves on when he dropped those 2 balls early on and actually switched to regular gloves, and it seemed to be better after that. They didn't really have to throw the ball much. So anything from this game about the passing game, it's really tough to measure because they just didn't have to do it, and it wasn't an effort to do so. Moving forward, of course, you're not going to steamroll teams with the running game this way every single week. So those guys will have to step up.
Yeah, this is almost like going back to the conversations we would have in previous seasons where even in victory, you can nitpick some things because you're always looking ahead. And for much of this recent portion of the Bills' schedule, I've said it's not about style points, it's simply about winning. But now that the Bills seem to have put themselves in a position where you can once again allow yourself to look more down the road for how they need to be playing and what they need to do to not just make the playoffs at this point, but do some noise if and when they get in there. And the passing game, I think, is one of those things. I think Diggs is obviously at the top of that list. And then you're still going to need things from the Kincaids. How are they going to incorporate Dawson Knox? Gabe Davis, once again, no receptions on one target. He is just completely, it's not even inconsistent this game anymore. I mean, he's now consistent in not being a factor really much at all.
Right.
And so I agree that, yes, they didn't need the passing game, so you don't need to focus on it too much here. But some of these issues and some of the things are just in a smaller sample size, but they've been the issues that have been around this passing attack for weeks.
Want to switch gears now to the defensive side of the football, which obviously deserves a ton of credit in this game. Dallas came in, number one scoring offense in the NFL. They hold Dak Prescott, who, for all intents and purposes, with Brock Purdy, was the MVP frontrunner coming into this game. He throws 21 of 34, 134 yards, a pick, passer rating of 57.7. CeeDee Lamb, not a whole lot there, 7 catches, 53 yards. How were they able to so succinctly keep that Dallas offense in check? Now, with that said, we know that they're much better at home in the Dome at AT&T Stadium, but still, that's one of the best offenses in the entire NFL. They had nothing going on all day.
Well, and the numbers you just rattled off for Dak are much better because he got a lot of that in garbage time when the Bills didn't have their full defense out there. 3 quarters in, 10 of 17 for 59 yards for Dak Prescott. 59 yards.
That's incredible.
That's incredible. And overall, 195 yards, 3.4 per play, 14 first downs. I mean, they were averaging the most in the NFL. It was a not miraculous. It was an incredibly impressive performance. You just look at their drive chart, 8 plays, 19 net yards, punt. 0 for 3 and out there, punt. Then they got 11 for 61. They got aided by a 15-yard penalty, field goal. And 5 for 14, punt. 6 for 11, punt. 3 for -8, punt. 7 for 23, interception. And then the 15 for 80 on the last drive of the game where, I mean, it really didn't matter. So you're giving them 80 yards. They had 195 total.
Wow.
So really, when the game was in the balance, for lack of a better term, and the Bills had their first-string defense out there, they barely had over 100 yards of total offense. And this is a unit that was humming, coming into this one. 40 points in 3 of their last 5, 30 points in 9 of their 13 games, and to get 10 points. It's interesting to think, oh no, my voice is going, that.
It's okay. Somebody had to pick up the Kevin Carroll role.
Right.
I could take over if you need me for a second here.
I'll just say this. We thought the Miami performance was impressive October 1st. To me, this is the best defensive performance the Bills have had all year.
Yeah, and I'll be interested to see, kind of looking back, watching this game again, looking at some of the film and those sorts of things when those things come out. What exactly Sean McDermott and his crew had dialed up to make it so hard on this Dallas offense? I mean, they got after they got after Prescott, caused him some trouble. You saw Leonard Floyd in there. You saw the usual suspects. You saw Greg Rousseau. You saw Ed Oliver get in there. And so when you're pressuring a quarterback who's kind of a cerebral player who likes to deliver on time, those sorts of things, I mean, that any quarterback, right? Doesn't matter if it's Josh or if it's Mahomes or whoever, they're typically not as great when you're getting them off their spot, especially a quarterback like Dak who had been picking teams apart. So I'll be interested to see what exactly McDermott drew up there to make that happen. Obviously, it's about the Joes, too, on the field, and those guys were fantastic. In the back end, too, they really held up. You didn't see anything deep downfield. You saw Dak take a couple of shots, but nothing doing, and missed on those. So really just a complete defensive performance all around, starting with that defensive line and working their way back.
Leonard Floyd gets a sack, 10.5 sacks. It's frankly remarkable, Andy, to think he's the first Bills player with double-digit sacks since Lorenzo Alexander in 2016.
Old Zoe, man. He was great.
It's crazy to think that they have invested so heavily into the defensive front, the defensive line, into pass rushers for years. And it's taken a guy they pulled off the street in June to be the one who's been the best pass rusher they've had since, I guess you would say, Lorenzo. But from an actual pure pass rusher, we signed this guy to get after the quarterback off the edge. What? Mario Williams? I mean, honestly, that's kind of how far back you have to go to find a prolific edge rusher that you signed him. We brought you in to do it, and it actually is working out. It's incredible to think and wonder, where would this defense be if they didn't, and I'm not saying it was an either or, but all right, you had $10 million that's going to Leonard Floyd, and DeAndre Hopkins is still sitting out there. They went with Leonard Floyd. A lot of people wished at the time they went with DeAndre Hopkins. To me, while DeAndre Hopkins would be great, Leonard Floyd might be more impactful for this team for what he's done and continues to do.
Yeah, and just think about, they knew or had to have known it was likely Von Miller might take some time to get back, if he ever does, right, to the Von we used to see. Leaving all the legal issues aside, that's a whole nother story of him being on the field right now. But to have the foresight to say, you know what, we need another pass rusher, somebody who's been productive in the NFL, who had some good years with the Rams and really kind of turned his career around there. We're going to sign him in June off the streets, and he comes in and he's your most productive pass rusher. It's really incredible, like you said. And when he and Oliver are on the field together, and this is no disrespect to Russo or anybody else who's had a good year too, but you just see those two work together, and you kind of saw that in the way that Oliver was talking post-game about the way that Floyd just has a knack for getting to lanes where he can get towards the quarterback and finish off plays, and that's what they've been missing. I mean, you brought up Mario Williams. Obviously Jerry Hughes had some good years, especially earlier when he was with Mario Williams and Kyle Williams and Marcel Darius. But, yeah, I mean, you're going back, 8-10 years to see a pass rush that's been this effective, especially by one player for the Bills.
And it's funny now we don't have to look as much into off-season mode and what are the Bills going to do with the roster, because the postseason is becoming more of a clearer picture in terms of, all right, you can actually see pathways for the Bills to get there, where just a few weeks ago it didn't seem that way. I'm going to be really curious to see what they do with Leonard Floyd. Part of me thinks, just money-wise, I just don't know if they can afford to keep him, while also thinking this guy might be the most important person that they should try to keep on this roster of anyone who is about to be an unrestricted free agent. He told me when I sat down with him a month or so ago that he feels only playing about half the snaps, which we understand that's the rotation base that the Bills front does, is the best thing for his career. And the numbers, this is the best season of his career. So maybe we'll see how that factors in, with both sides feeling like, okay, maybe as he's 30 years old, this could maybe be something to keep him playing at an elite level, getting paid very good money, and extending his career as he approaches his 30s and early 30s, and maybe 3-year deal, mid 30s.
Right. And that's all well and good to think about the future, and we can have those conversations. But right now, looking big picture at this team this season, boy, it's all right in front of them. I mean, they're sitting here still 9th in the AFC playoff standings, but that's up a couple of spots from 11th, which they were going into the week. Pittsburgh, Denver fall. So they're a game ahead of those guys. They're trailing Houston, Indianapolis, Cincinnati at 8-6, and the division is certainly in play. So this is going to be a fun 3 weeks for the Bills. Like you said earlier, I mean, a few weeks ago, the sky was falling, right? You have that article that comes out about McDermott. The offense had struggled. They fire Ken Dorsey. It was just kind of seemed like a firestorm. Win one, lose one, win one, lose one. Look, back-to-back wins for the first time in a long time since that stretch early in September. So it's all right in front of them. And the way they're playing, if they do get in, they are a dangerous, dangerous team.
So I've been saying 10 wins, I think it's a min. Some people, when I even said that this evening, said, oh, no, it's going to take 11. Here's the thing. And as we're taping this, it's 9:47 on Sunday night. It's halftime of the Sunday night game. Jacksonville is losing. So that would put them with 6 losses as well. But even pulling them out of the equation, the other teams that are 8-6 currently and in the wild card, Cincinnati Bengals 8-6. Here's their final 3 games. At the Steelers next week, at the Kansas City Chiefs, and versus the Cleveland Browns. Indianapolis is the 7th seed currently. At the Falcons, Raiders, and then they play Houston. Houston plays Cleveland, Tennessee, Indianapolis. And then if you want to throw the Browns in there, they're 9-5. They play at Houston, the Jets, and the Cincinnati Bengals. You'll notice I said of those 3-4 teams, they play each other. And so to me, the Bills, there's going to be 2 or 3 of these teams that are automatically going to get at least one more loss. So then that will put them automatically, best case scenario, at 10-7. And you're right, the Bills lose out in a tiebreaker to Cincinnati. And they lose in a tiebreaker to Jacksonville. And they lose in a tiebreaker, well, a lot of the other ones are now below them. But it just seems like 10 wins can get them in. And obviously now, I think the division is so on. Like, to me, my expectation as we sit here right now is week 18, the Bills are 10-6, the Dolphins are 10-6, and you're going for the AFC East week 18 on Sunday Night Football. That's what I'm preparing myself for. That's what I firmly believe is going to be how this all plays out. And that is bananas. And even so, even if like they lost that game, I don't think the loser of that game misses the playoffs. I think the loser of that game then just goes on the road and, to be perfectly honest with you, maybe faces the other team again the next week.
Well, right.
I mean, you just never know.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing with the division is, too, I mean, people are saying, yeah, the Dolphins are 2 games up. If the Dolphins lose one of the next 2, which is certainly possible against Dallas and against Baltimore, and the Bills come in winning the next 2, the Bills are 1 game down. But if they tie them in record and beat them in the finale and they end up with the same record, the Bills win the division. So Miami only has to lose 1 game for this to really be on, right? So,
yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think people kind of miss that and think they need to, because the Bills beat them earlier, they only have to get within 1 game and then beat them in the finale, and the Bills win the division. So, I mean, it's certainly in the realm of possibility that Dallas and or Baltimore beats them. So that's interesting. I'm looking at the New York Times playoff simulator right now. My, how things have changed. They are currently listing the Bills as a 71% chance to make the playoffs. It was like in the 20s 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
It actually has them with a 41% chance to host the wild card, which means they would have won the division. A better chance of that happening than the wild card, which is at 29%. It's wild, right? The Bills have the better chance of winning the division than even being out of the playoffs. It's crazy to me.
Right, because they lost to the wrong teams, right?
Right.
I mean, that's really what it comes down
to.
The
tiebreakers hurt.
You lost to Jacksonville, who I still think is going to win the division, and then they lost to the Bengals. So that's where And then, of course, just the AFC record, but with the conference and all that, where the Bills are currently 4-5, and everyone else outside of Cincinnati's actually worse. They're 3-6 in the AFC. But obviously, in a head-to-head situation, that wouldn't matter.
You'd have to hope that they got into a tie with, if that was the case, and it came down to
like
Cincinnati,
a three-way tie,
like a three-way
right.
or more. That way, the head-to-head doesn't come into play.
Right. So it's just it's wild to think how far things have come, and still a long way to go. But to me, this was the swing game. I thought if they lost to the Cowboys, it still was very, very possible that they would miss the playoffs. Now, I would be shocked if they missed the playoffs. And to me, it's more about, can they rattle off 5 in a row, beat Miami, and steal the division away from them, or just kind of back their way in as a 7 seed? Because again, Cincinnati, yeah, they're a great story. I don't think they're running the table. They'll beat the Pittsburgh Steelers because I don't think they're very good. I think they'll lose to Kansas City, and they already lost to Cleveland. So, and Cleveland's
incredible right now. That's another great story with what Joe Flacco's done there.
They got a rabbit's foot that they just keep rubbing to the nub because they're incredibly lucky there. But that defense, I mean, you never know. Houston could lose Cleveland, Tennessee, and Indianapolis. I mean, would it surprise you if Houston lost everyone? I know they're in the 8th seed, so it's not as pressing. It should be an interesting thing, but you have to believe that really you don't have to pay too much about everything on the peripheral and what everyone else is doing, because it'll kind of shake itself out as the Bills hopefully take care of business in the next 2 games.
We'll get into this more. You and Kevin will get into this throughout the week, later this week. But what do you make of the matchup with the Chargers? Obviously, they're coming off getting absolutely embarrassed, lambasted by their division rival, Las Vegas. They fire Brandon Staley. They fire the Buffalo guy, the Buffalo native, St. Francis High School alum, Tom Telesco, as general manager. And we've seen a lot of talk, I don't know if you have, of people pointing out that teams' records are pretty good the game after firing a coach. I don't see it with the Chargers, especially without their quarterback. I mean, if Herbert was playing, sure, but I don't see any way that they're able to hold off the Bills in this game. And that would be an embarrassing loss for the Bills if they go to L.A. and lose with playoff hopes on the line.
And they've had embarrassing losses. I'd say 3 of them this season.
They've had their fill, right?
So certainly not going to take anything lightly. And it's not because they got smoked by Vegas the other night. They're just not a good football team. They were flawed with Justin Herbert and all the other pieces around him. And now they just keep adding more injuries into the mix. It would probably be the most shocking of any of these shocking Bills losses this season, like the Jets and certainly New England and the Denver game. It would be incredible if they blew that, especially considering the way that they're playing. I don't see it. Maybe an inspired performance will make it a little tougher out the gate, but it's about the people on the field and Easton Stick against this defense. If Dak Prescott can't do it, if Jalen Hurts was kind of held in check, if Patrick Mahomes, if these caliber of quarterbacks can't get it done against this Bills defense, what in the world makes you think Easton Stick could? Honestly, the only path I see would be UB's own Khalil Mack has another 6-sack performance, and this offensive line that has stood so tall for this season just gets beaten, and I don't see it. A true Christmas miracle would have to occur for, honestly, it to be even remotely close.
You've had worse road trips than going to L.A. Christmas weekend. You're probably looking forward to this one, and knock on wood, flights go all right. You're going to be back for Christmas, which is nice too.
It's only going to be in the mid-60s, Andy. So, kind of a bummer of a trip to California around Christmas time.
But it's a trip to California.
I'm kidding.
It works.
I'm kidding.
Yeah, right.
I'm kidding. No, I'm all about it. I'm super excited. Mid-60s, don't care. Not everyone is an LA fan, a West Coast fan. I am. So I look forward to the trip. It's going to probably be a quick in and out type one because of the holiday, but I'm going to put in a reservation at a restaurant from one of my favorite Food Network chefs who I was out there and went there last year for the opener. And enjoy ourselves and do some football work.
All right, the Bills, one more to go before Christmas. It's a big one because they all are at this point with their playoff lives on the line. We'll have much more about the Bills and the Chargers throughout the week on Spectrum News 1 and the Buffalo End Zone podcast. Kevin Carroll will be back with you later this week. For Jon Scott, I'm Andy Young, and that's Buffalo End Zone.